1. Prologue. You are listening at famvetv.info. There is a well-known saying that goes like this. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. I doubt I have to explain the meaning, but for argument's sake I will. You can see it from a physical perspective, as a body with a large volume will contain a large amount of mass as well, and so when said body falls it will apply an equally large amount of force. There is the social context as well. For example, a mistake made by a politician will be far more costly to their career than that made by a small-time shopkeeper. Now, my dear reader, you may be wondering what this has to do with a story involving the Naruto franchise. Well, this is precisely how the story starts. Aurora Ambridge was a well-renowned scientist in the fields of space-time mesh bending and quantum physics. Her aspiration was to be the first to breach the space-time mesh in a controlled way to form a stable wormhole. I would like to point out that I said she was instead of is. Why? Simple, she is no more. The first attempt she ever made was her last, as she made a simple yet vital mistake. The machine she was using to open a portal the size of a few atoms in diameter hadn't been properly configured. This error, however, was not hers, but that of her personal assistant. If one were to look back, it was a sequence of seemingly inconsequential actions that led to the mistake. Emma, the assistant, had spent the previous night celebrating with her colleagues, Aurora not included. In said celebration she had consumed a fair amount of alcohol, which of course led to a hangover the next day. Not wanting to miss their first ever attempt at making history, she decided not to call in sick. Coincidentally, that day was a guard rookie /S first day, and so he performed his duties poorly. This led to Emma's unimpeded entry into the facility despite not being in working condition. Mistakes were made. Emma, with her rather prominent headache, imputed the wrong parameters into the machine, which led to catastrophe. For starters, the quantum restriction field's oscillation frequency had been attuned to 5 Hz more than it should. The portal diameter had been set to 5 meters instead of 5 femtometers. Worst of all was the desynchronization of the portal /S temporal canals. Many things should have happened thanks to all these mistakes. The machine should not have started, and if it did, it should have shut down before it could even start the warming up. Even if it did manage to warm up and properly attempt to open the wormhole, the sheer energy requirement should have caused its shutdown. None of that happened. Somehow the sum of all the mistakes led to the impossibility of the machine functioning with normality. The energy required was absorbed by the quantum restriction field from the temporal dysfunction created by the desynchronization of the temporal canals. This led to the creation of a pair of wormholes of 5 meters in diameter instead of a singular one. Worst of all was the fact that only God could know where the wormholes led. A second. The portals lasted a single second as the power grid suffered a meltdown from the sheer amount of energy generated. However, that was enough for Aurora to be mercilessly ripped from the fabric of reality. She had been a single step closer to the containment glass than her peers, and that was enough to be within the 5 meters spherical radius of the wormholes. All Emma and the other scientists saw was a flash of light and then nothing. The lights of the underground compound had died, and so they were in complete darkness. A moment later, a scientist used his phone's light to observe their surroundings. In front of them, where the bright Dr. Aurora Ambridge had once stood, was a crater. A perfect pair of spheres had been cut into the concrete walls and floor, leaving nothing behind. In the turbulence of time and space, where all realities and none existed at the same time, a new straggler appeared. It happened too fast for Aurora to react. One moment she was standing in front of the containment glass exception to write history, the next she was flung through an unknown environment. Worst of all was the pain. An indescribable pain assaulted her senses as her body was assaulted by dissonant waves of space and time. Any other living being should have died by now, and yet by a miracle she was kept alive. The colors were blinding and suffocating. Her body demanded air, but there was none in this place, if it could be called as such. Unknown objects would smash against her body, ripping it to pieces only for a wave of temporal inconsistency to fix it. Some other objects would instead be absorbed, causing an untold amount of changes. Time went on, or back as she continued to suffer the worst hell imaginable. A millennium experienced in a microsecond. A microsecond experienced in a millennium. In a place where time and space lose all coherence, how is the feeble human mind expected to keep sane? Finally her body was torn, shredded to nothingness, and yet something remained. The soul, a concept all living things know exists and yet none comprehend. That remnant was finally freed from the chaos of space and time to either disappear or find a new vessel. Listen to the full novel at famvetv.info, direct link in the description.